The first warning wasn't turbulence, it was silence. A hollow pause so unnatural, it made her look up as if the plane itself had just remembered it could die. Aisha tightened her grip on the seat armrest and stared across the narrow aisle at the man she had spent months hating in quiet, disciplined ways. King Kale Valerius people didn't call him king in public, not in New York, not in boardrooms, not in the polished offices of Valeriers Holdings, but the title clung to him anyway, like shadow. He sat perfectly still, tailored black coat unwrinkled, pale face unreadable, eyes fixed on a leather-bound folder, as if ink could hold back gravity. Aisha was there, because she had no choice. The contract was brutal, the pay was life-changing, and her mother's hospital bills didn't care about pride. Still, she hated him for how cold he was, not just emotionally distant, but physically. In meetings, the air around him felt 10 degrees lower, and she'd caught employees rubbing their hands together like winter had followed him indoors. He never smiled, never apologized, never explained the way people trembled when he entered a room. That fear spilled onto her. 2 managers dumped extra work on her because you're the only one who can stand near him. Coworkers whispered that she must be trying to climb a ladder no one survived. Once, a supervisor laughed at her torn shoes outside the elevator and said, "Careful, girl. You're not built for his world." Kale had been standing behind them. He heard it. He said nothing. That was the day her hatred became personal. The plane jolted so violently, her stomach tried to climb into her throat. Her tablet slid off the tray table and clattered to the floor. Across from her, a crystal glass tipped near Kale's elbow. Then his hand moved. Not fast, not quick, something worse. It blurred, and the glass was caught by the stem, a fraction of an inch above the carpet, perfectly upright, not a single drop spilled. He set it down with a soft click and finally looked at her, his gaze steady like deep water. "Strap in," he said, voice low and smooth, the kind of sound that didn't ask for obedience. It assumed it. "The pilots are losing control." Aisha's mouth went dry. "Losing." Another crack ripped through the cabin, metal groaning as if the sky had clenched its fist around them. The lights flickered and died. A gray gloom filled the aircraft, broken only by flashes of lightning outside the window. Oxygen masks dropped, swaying like pale nooses. Aisha reached up, but the force of the dive pinned her back. She couldn't move. Panic roared in her ears, loud as the engines screaming. She turned her head and saw Kale's eyes change, just for a second, an inner crimson flare like embers behind smoke. He unbuckled his seatbelt. While she was trapped by gravity, he stood. He actually stood in a falling plane, calm as a predator stepping into familiar darkness. He crossed the aisle in one fluid motion and threw himself over her, his body forming a hard shield. The scent that hit her wasn't cologne. It was cold stone after rain, and something metallic like copper. "Close your eyes," he commanded near her ear. She wanted to hate him even then, wanted to push him off and scream that she didn't belong under anyone's protection, but fear made her obey. The impact wasn't a sound. It was the end of everything steel and bone and earth deciding who mattered. Her world became crushing pressure, and then nothing. A blackout so complete it felt like falling through a locked door. When consciousness returned, it came in waves of pain and freezing air. Aisha coughed, lungs burning, the taste of smoke and fuel sharp on her tongue. The world was sideways. Her seat was torn from the plane and wedged into snow at an angle, the fuselage above groaning like a dying animal. Her fingers, stiff and shaking, fumbled with the buckle until it snapped free, and she tumbled out onto her knees. Pine trees towered around the wreckage remote, silent, endless. The cold wasn't weather. It was a threat. She forced herself upright, clutching her shoulder, searching for movement, for voices, for any sign she wasn't alone. "Mr. Valeriers?" She shouted, and her voice sounded small against the vast forest. For a terrifying moment, there was only wind and the soft hiss of leaking fuel. Then, behind her, came a calm reply, as if they were still in a conference room. "I am here." She turned and saw him near the broken tail, rushing invisible dust from his lapel, pale face untouched by blood or bruise. He looked immaculate, too immaculate, and that should have comforted her. But instead, it made fear crawl under her skin. No one walked out of a crash like that. No one. Cale's gaze swept the trees, calculating, cold, and then it softened by a fraction when it landed on her trembling hands. "We cannot stay," he said. "Night is coming, and the smell will bring things that hunt." Aisha swallowed hard, hatred cracking under the weight of survival. "My shoulder," she whispered, voice breaking. Cale was in front of her in an instant, hands like ice, but touch unexpectedly gentle. "This will hurt," he warned, and before she could answer, he said it with precise force, pain exploding into a scream she couldn't hold back. She sagged, tears blurring her vision, and Cale caught her as if she weighed nothing at all. For the first time since she'd met him, he didn't look like a king or a monster. He looked like someone carrying a burden too old to name. "Breathe," he said, steadying her. "Stay close. Do not wander." She should have pulled away. She should have told him she still hated him. But the forest didn't care about her pride, and the only thing between her and the freezing dark was the cold vampire king she'd spent months wishing would disappear. The forest swallowed them quickly, as if the wreckage behind them had never existed. Snow crunched beneath Aisha's boots, while the last light of day bled through the towering pines in streaks of fading gold and violet. Pain throbbed in her shoulder with every step, her breath forming weak clouds in the freezing air. But Cale moved ahead of her with unnatural ease, breaking a path through the drifts. Without slowing once, he didn't shiver, he didn't pant. He didn't even leave deep footprints like she did. Watching him stirred the same uneasy thought that had haunted her since the office days. He did not belong to the same rules as other men. Twice she stumbled, and twice his hand caught her elbow before she hit the ground. His grip firm yet careful, as though she were fragile glass he refused to drop. She pulled away the second time, pride flaring through her exhaustion. "I can walk," she muttered. Cale didn't argue. He only adjusted his pace so she could keep up, a silent concession that irritated her almost as much as it reassured her. They walked for hours until the cold began to bite deep enough to blur her vision. The wind howled through the canyon walls like distant voices mourning the dead, and Aisha's legs trembled from fatigue. Just when she thought she would collapse, Cale raised a hand and guided her beneath a stone overhang carved into the cliffside. It wasn't a cave, but it shielded them from the wind. "Sit," he said, quietly. She obeyed without protest this time, lowering herself onto the dry earth and hugging her arms around her body as violent shivers overtook her. Cale disappeared into the dark tree line and returned minutes later, carrying an armful of thick branches that should have required 2 men. He dropped them in a neat pile and crouched. "Do you have a lighter?" she asked through chattering teeth. "No," he replied. "But I do not require one." His hands moved so fast they blurred, friction building between the dry sticks until smoke curled upward, then flame sparked alive. Within minutes, a steady fire roared, casting flickering amber light across the stone walls. Aisha stared, equal parts grateful and unsettled. "You work in skyscrapers," she said slowly. "Since when do you start fires like a survivalist?" Cale's expression didn't change. "I have lived long enough to learn many skills." The answer sounded simple, but something in the way he said long enough made her skin prickle. She edged closer to the warmth, extending her hands toward the flames. Only then did she notice Cale remain just outside the fire's heat, sitting upright on a rock as if warmth meant nothing to him. "You're not cold," she said, steadying him carefully. "You haven't been since the crash." He didn't respond immediately. His gaze stayed fixed on the forest, beyond the firelight, alert, predatory. My body tolerates low temperatures, he said at last. It always has. The explanation was thin, and they both knew it. Silence settled between them, thick but no longer hostile. Exhaustion softened her anger, and curiosity slipped into the space hatred once occupied. Back on the plane, she said quietly. You caught that glass before it fell. Cale's jaw tightened. Reflex. And you walked in a falling aircraft. No answer. She swallowed. And you're not injured. Not even scratched. He finally looked at her, eyes, reflecting firelight like molten metal. You should sleep, he said, deflecting the question entirely. He removed his heavy coat and draped it around her shoulders before she could protest. The fabric was warm from the fire, but carried no body heat, as if it had never touched skin. I will keep watch. Sleep came in fragments, broken by wind and distant animal cries. Each time she woke, Cale hadn't moved. He sat like a carved guardian, eyes glowing faintly in the dark whenever the flames dipped low. By morning, hunger gnawed at her stomach painfully. They resumed walking downhill, following the slope in hopes of finding water or rescue. Near midday she leaned against a tree, dizzy. We need food, she whispered. Cale studied her for a moment. You need food. Then he vanished into the woods without a sound. Fear tightened her chest until he returned 10 minutes later holding a rabbit, its neck snapped cleanly. He handed it to her. Can you prepare it? She stared, nauseated. I've never. He sighed softly, took it back, and skinned it with precise, practiced motions using a small antique knife. He didn't look hungry while he worked, only detached, almost repulsed. They roasted the meat over a small fire. Aisha ate desperately, warmth returning to her limbs. She offered him a portion. Eat, Cale recoiled slightly. I do not require it, she frowned. You haven't eaten once. He didn't answer. A forest went silent. Cale's head snapped toward the trees, nostrils flaring. His posture changed instantly, from calm to lethal. Get behind me, he ordered. Aisha obeyed without thinking. A low growl vibrated through the ground as a massive grizzly emerged from the brush, towering and furious, drawn by the scent of blood. Terror rooted her in place. Run, she whispered. Cale didn't move. The bear charged. What happened next shattered everything she believed about him. He stepped forward and released a guttural hiss that was not human. The bear faltered, but still lunged. Cale moved faster than sight, striking the animal with impossible force and throwing it backward into a tree, hard enough to crack the trunk. The beast fled in terror. Silence crashed down around them. Aisha stared at him, breath frozen in her lungs as he turned slowly, and his eyes burned crimson in the dim light. Aisha could not move, could not breathe, could not even decide whether the thing standing in front of her was still the man she had worked for, or something far older wearing his face. The crimson glow in Cale's eyes did not flicker like firelight. It burned from within, steady and ancient, casting faint reflections across the snow. His skin looked paler than before, almost translucent, dark, veins faintly visible beneath the surface like cracks under ice. When he exhaled, it was not mist like hers. It was colder, thinner, as though the air itself recoiled from him. She took an involuntary step back, boots crunching loudly in the silence. Cale noticed. His expression did not turn angry. It turned wounded. He looked away first, jaw tightening as though her fear had struck deeper than the bear ever could. You should not have seen that, he said quietly, voice roughened by something heavier than exhaustion. She swallowed hard, forcing words past her dry throat. Seen what? He laughed once, humorless, and the sound echoed strangely through the trees. Say it. He turned back slowly, and the full weight of his gaze pinned her where she stood. You already know. Her heart hammered painfully. Every childhood story, every whispered myth, every nightmare image collided in her mind. She stared at the faint glint of elongated fangs behind his lips, at the unnatural stillness of his body, at the predator's tension, coiled beneath perfect control. Vampire, she breathed. The word hung in the frozen air like a verdict. Cale closed his eyes, shoulders lowering, not in defeat, but in acceptance. Yes, he said at last, king among them, though that title is a curse more than a crown. He expected her to run. She saw it in the way he subtly shifted his stance, not to chase her, but to ensure he would not follow if she fled. But she did not run. Fear was there, sharp and undeniable, yet it tangled with something else memory. The plane, his body shielding hers. The coat around her shoulders. The fire he built. The bear he fought. You saved me, she said instead. He flinched as if the gratitude hurt more than accusation. It is my responsibility. No, she said, voice strengthening. It is choice. He turned away, gaze fixed on the distant tree line, and for the first time since she had known him, he looked tired, not physically, but eternally. You hate me, he said. You always have. This knowledge will only justify it. Aisha hesitated. Months of resentment rose instinctively, the cold meetings, the silence when she was humiliated, the suffocating distance he kept. But the forest, the crash, the nights of silent protection, they complicated everything. I hated what you seemed to be, she admitted. Not what you are. He did not respond, but his posture softened by a fraction. A wave of dizziness hit her then, and she steadied herself against a tree. Hunger and exhaustion were catching up again. Cale noticed instantly. His head tilted slightly, nostrils flaring as if he sensed something deeper in her breathing. You are weakening, he said. We must conserve your strength. She gave a weak laugh. Funny, the vampire king is worried about my survival. He didn't smile. Your survival is my priority. They walked again, but the dynamic between them had shifted. The silence was no longer heavy. It was aware, charged with unspoken understanding. As dusk approached, they reached a frozen stream and stopped. Aisha knelt to drink melted snow, hands shaking. When she stood again, she noticed Cale was watching her, not hungrily, but intensely, as though fighting something inside himself. You haven't eaten, she said slowly. Not once. He looked away immediately. I do not require human food. Realization struck her with quiet force. You're starving. His silence confirmed it louder than words. Since the crash, she continued, voice softening, you've been protecting me, earning energy, fighting predators. And you haven't fed. Cale's control cracked slightly. His fangs extended a fraction before he forced them back. Do not pursue this line of thought, he warned. It is dangerous. Instead of retreating, she stepped closer. Fear trembled in her chest, but compassion steadied her feet. You would let yourself die before hurting me, she said. Wouldn't you? He did not answer, but the anguish in his eyes was answer enough. Her hands shook as she rolled back the sleeve of her coat, exposing her wrist to the cold air. The pulse beneath her skin beat fast but steady. Cale froze completely. Aisha, he said, voice dropping into something almost feral. Lower your arm. She didn't. You saved my life more than once, she said gently. Let me save yours. He stepped back as if her offered wrist were fire. I will not make you pray. I am not prey, she said. I am your partner in survival. The word partner hung between them, fragile but powerful. Cale trembled not from cold, but restraint. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, he stepped forward. He did not grab her. He lifted her wrist with reverence, eyes searching her face for fear. Finding none, he pressed a soft, apologetic kiss to her pulse before his fangs pierced skin. There was no pain, only warmth draining slowly, strangely calming. He drank carefully, stopping within moments. When he pulled back, he sealed the wound instantly with his tongue, leaving no mark. Then, to her shock, the ancient vampire king dropped to one knee before her, head bowed in shame and gratitude. "In 7 centuries," he whispered, voice breaking, "no human has ever trusted me so completely." Aisha rested her hand gently on his head, fear replaced by something deeper, stronger. "Then remember this," she said softly. "You're not alone in this forest anymore." The bond forged that night changed everything between them, though neither spoke of it directly. Survival had stripped away titles, contracts, and the rigid distance that once defined them. Now they walked side by side through the endless forest, not employer and assistant, not king and subordinate, but partners bound by trust, blood, and the fragile thread of shared survival. Kale's strength had returned after feeding, but something else had softened. Within him, he no longer walked several steps ahead. Instead, he adjusted his pace to hers, occasionally guiding her around hidden ice patches or low branches with a protective hand at her back. The cold aura that once felt intimidating now felt almost comforting, a steady presence guarding her from the unknown dangers of the wilderness. As they descended deeper into the valley, the landscape changed from frozen cliffs to dense pine basins, where ancient trees stood like silent witnesses to centuries of secrets. Aisha noticed how Kale moved through this world, not like a lost man, but like a ruler walking through forgotten territory he once knew. His senses remained constantly alert, his head tilted at distant sounds she couldn't hear, his eyes scanning shadows before she even noticed them. Yet despite that vigilance, he spoke more now than he ever had in the office towers of the human world. He told her fragments of his past, not boastfully, but with the weary tone of someone unburdening ancient weight. He spoke of medieval courts where alliances were sealed in candlelit halls, of wars he watched from castle ramparts, of centuries spent building wealth not out of greed but necessity. Power protects anonymity, he explained, as they crossed a frozen ridge. The richer I became, the less questions humans asked about my absence from daylight. Aisha listened quietly, absorbing the scale of his existence. 7 centuries. The number itself felt unreal. "That sounds lonely," she said finally. Kale's faint smile held no humor. It was safer to be lonely. He explained how he built his corporate empire around artifacts and antiquities, because objects did not die, did not age, did not leave. "I surrounded myself with history so I would not have to mourn the present," he admitted. The confession settled heavily between them, deepening her understanding of the cold distance she once resented. It had never been arrogance. It had been protection. By the 5th day, hope began to stir. The terrain sloped downward more sharply, and the distant sound of flowing water reached them. Civilization often followed rivers. Aisha's exhaustion lightened slightly at the possibility of rescue, but Kale's posture stiffened instead of relaxing. His hand rose suddenly, signaling silence. His eyes narrowed, scanning the tree line with predatory focus. "Heartbeats," he murmured. "Many of them." Relief flooded her instantly. "Rescuers?" Kale didn't answer right away. He inhaled deeply, and his expression darkened. "No," he said quietly. "Hunters." Confusion replaced her relief. He pulled her down behind a cluster of boulders overlooking a clearing below. Through the branches, she saw them men in tactical gear, moving with military precision. They carried weapons unlike standard rescue teams, along with metallic nets that shimmered unnaturally in the dim light. No one called for survivors. No one searched wreckage. They moved like predators tracking specific prey. "Who are they?" she whispered. "The Syndicate," Kale replied, voice tight. "They monitor private flight paths for anomalies. Creatures like me are valuable to certain markets." Her stomach turned. "You mean they capture vampires?" "Harvest," he corrected grimly. "Blood, tissue, immortality research. If they take me, I will never leave a laboratory again." Before she could respond, a metallic hiss cut the air. A canister landed near them, spewing thick smoke. Kale shoved her backward instantly. "Run!" he commanded, just as a net fired from the trees and wrapped around him. The mesh glowed faintly, sizzling against his skin like acid. He roared in pain, struggling, but the more he fought, the tighter it constricted. Armed men emerged, striking him with rifle butts, forcing him to his knees before chaining him with heavy restraints. Aisha lay hidden in the brush, heart shattering as she watched them drag him toward their temporary camp near the riverbank. Their eyes met once through the chaos, not pleading, but commanding her to stay hidden. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to save herself, but she remembered the crash, the fire, the nights he kept watch while she slept. Partners. The word echoed in her mind with fierce clarity. She scanned the forest desperately, mind racing for any advantage. That was when she remembered the massive tracks she had seen earlier near the stream, fresh cougar prints pressed deep into the mud. An idea formed, reckless, dangerous, but the only chance she had. She moved silently through the undergrowth, following the tracks until she found the predator's half-buried deer carcass. Fighting nausea, she cut a blood-soaked chunk of meat and tracked the animal itself to a rocky ledge. The cougar rose when it saw her, muscles coiled, eyes glowing with territorial fury. Terror nearly paralyzed her, but she forced herself to move, waving the meat, then throwing it toward the hunter's camp before sprinting through the brush, making as much noise as possible. The cougar followed instantly. She burst into the camp screaming, drawing attention just as the predator lunged into the clearing. Chaos exploded gunfire, shouting, men scrambling as the enraged animal attacked. In the confusion, no one guarded the chained vampire king. Aisha dropped beside Kale, hands shaking as she grabbed a discarded rifle and fired at the chain link. The recoil nearly knocked her over, but the restraint shattered. Kale rose slowly, not as a prisoner, but as a king unleashed. His eyes burned with controlled fury as he disarmed the remaining hunters with supernatural precision, ensuring they would not follow. Then he grabbed her waist, and the world blurred as he ran faster than any human, carrying her away from the collapsing camp, deeper into the forest toward the distant promise of rescue lights flickering beyond the ridge. They did not stop running until the sounds of gunfire, shouts, and the enraged cougar faded into distant echoes swallowed by the mountains. Kale carried Aisha through the forest with impossible speed, his movements fluid despite the burns still faintly visible across his skin where the syndicate's net had scorched him. Wind tore through her hair as the trees blurred past, her arms instinctively tightening around his shoulders, not from fear, but from trust. When he finally slowed atop a high ridge, dawn's first gray light was bleeding into the sky, painting the snow in pale silver. Below them, a highway curved through the valley like a lifeline, and far in the distance, flashing rescue lights pierced the morning mist. Relief surged through her chest, so sharply it almost hurt. "We made it," she breathed. But Kale did not share her relief. His body stiffened beneath her grip, and suddenly he stumbled, dropping to one knee in the snow. At first she thought it was injury from the hunters, but then she saw it, the faint curl of smoke rising from his exposed skin where the early sunlight touched. He flinched instinctively, pulling his coat tighter around himself, face tightening in pain he tried to hide. "The sun," he rasped. "I cannot reach the road before it strengthens." Panic replaced relief instantly. The rescue vehicles were so close salvation, within sight yet lethal to him. "We're not stopping now," she said firmly, mind racing. She stripped off the emergency thermal blanket from the survival kit she had carried since the crash and wrapped it around his shoulders, layering his heavy coat over it. The reflective foil shielded the growing sunlight, but gaps remained. Without hesitation, she stepped closer and pulled him into her arms, pressing herself against him to hold the covering in place. "I will be your eyes," she said softly but firmly. Hold on to me. Don't let go. For a moment, the ancient king hesitated not from weakness, but from the unfamiliar vulnerability of depending on someone else for survival. Then his arm wrapped around her shoulders, grip protective even in his weakened state. Together they began walking down the ridge, one guiding, one enduring. They must have looked strange emerging from the tree line, wrapped in foil and dark wool like a single moving shadow, but the rescue helicopter spotted them immediately. The roar of rotors filled the valley as it descended onto the highway shoulder, medics rushing forward. One reached to pull the blanket away from Cale, but Aisha stepped between them instinctively. "He has a severe light condition," she said quickly, voice steady despite her racing heart. "Photosensitivity. Do not expose him." The medic hesitated, then nodded, helping them both into the helicopter without removing the covering. Cale remained silent the entire flight, his hand gripping hers tightly beneath the blanket, as though anchoring himself to the world through her presence alone. Their return to the city was nothing like their disappearance. News of the crash had already spread globally, and the survival of reclusive billionaire Cale Valerius turned it into a media storm. Cameras flashed outside the hospital, reporters shouting questions about the crash, about the mysterious assistant who survived with him. Cale vanished into his private penthouse the moment they landed, retreating to recover, to feed, to heal from the hunter's weapons that had harmed even his. Ancient resilience. Days passed without contact. For Aisha, the silence felt heavier than the forest nights had. She sat one evening in his vast library, the same room where she once felt like invisible staff, now feeling strangely out of place without him. The doors opened quietly. Cale entered, fully restored, dressed once more in flawless dark tailoring, but something had changed in his expression. The cold detachment was gone, replaced by something quieter, deeper. "The board demands I step down," he said calmly, walking toward the tall windows where heavy curtains blocked the sun. "They believe the crash compromised my judgment." Aisha folded her arms. "Did it?" He turned to face her, eyes steady. "Yes, because for the first time in 7 centuries, I value a life more than power." Her breath caught. He continued, voice lowering. "My world is dangerous. The syndicate knows you exist now. I should send you away with wealth enough to live 10 lifetimes in safety." Silence stretched between them. "Is that what you want?" he asked. She stepped closer, heart steady despite the gravity of his words. "No," she said simply. "I chose to stay in the forest. I'm choosing again now." Something unspoken passed between them, and not dramatic, not rushed, but deep as the bond formed in snow and survival. Cale exhaled slowly, as if releasing centuries of restraint. "Then everything changes," he said softly. And for the first time, the vampire king did not stand above her as ruler or employer, but beside her as equal, the beginning of something neither immortality nor mortality could easily define. The days following the crash did not quiet the storm around them. Instead, they intensified it. News channels replayed footage of the wreckage and rescue, analysts speculating about mechanical failure, while business journalists questioned Cale Valerius' leadership and mental stability. Investors panicked. Board members whispered about removing him. Through it all, Cale remained composed in public and silent in private, yet Aisha could see the tension beneath the surface. It was not fear for his empire that unsettled him. It was fear for her. The syndicate's failed attempt in the forest proved one thing clearly. His existence was no longer hidden, and anyone connected to him could become leverage. One evening, as twilight painted the city skyline in muted violet, Cale stood beside the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, heavy curtains shielding him from the fading sun. "They will come again," he said quietly. "Not immediately. They are patient. But they will not forget." Aisha walked toward him, her reflection merging with his in the dark glass. "Then we prepare," she replied. "Running isn't protection. Standing together is." He studied her face, searching for hesitation, but found none. The fragile assistant, who once avoided eye contact, had been replaced by someone steadier, shaped by fire and snow. The following morning, Cale did something no one expected. He called a global press conference. Cameras flashed in relentless bursts as he stepped onto the stage, wearing dark glasses, posture straight, presence commanding. Aisha stood just behind the curtain, heart racing not from fear of exposure, but from the weight of what this moment meant. Reporters fired questions about the crash, about alleged mental instability, about rumors of secret enemies. Cale listened without reacting. Then he leaned into the microphone, and the room fell silent under the gravity of his voice. "The truth," he began, calm and precise, "is that survival reveals character. In the wilderness, stripped of wealth and power, one fact became clear. Courage does not belong to titles." He paused deliberately before continuing. "Aisha Khan is the reason I stand here today. She demonstrated intelligence, bravery, and resilience beyond measure. From this day forward, she is not my employee. She is my equal partner in all corporate and philanthropic decisions." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Investors looked stunned. Commentators scribbled frantically. Cale did not elaborate. He removed his glasses briefly, allowing the intensity of his gaze to meet the cameras directly, and finished with controlled authority. "Leadership is not domination. It is trust. And I trust her." Without taking further questions, he stepped down and extended his hand toward Aisha. She accepted it without hesitation. The message was unmistakable. Respect had replaced hierarchy. Months passed, and public outrage softened into fascination. Cale restructured parts of his empire, redirecting wealth toward medical research and humanitarian initiatives in underserved communities. Causes Aisha had once quietly advocated for when she was just an assistant drafting proposals no one read. Now those ideas carried royal authority. The syndicate remained a shadow threat, but security tightened, and alliances formed quietly within supernatural networks Cale had long avoided. For the first time in centuries, he allowed others of his kind to stand beside him instead of ruling from isolation. The shift was subtle but profound. Power no longer meant solitude. One winter evening, nearly a year after the crash, Cale brought Aisha to a secluded mountain estate far from city lights. Snow fell gently across the balcony where they stood, the world hushed beneath silver moonlight. He no longer felt like cold marble beside her. He felt present, grounded. "Immortality teaches detachment," he said softly, watching the snowfall. "Loving you has undone that lesson." She turned to face him, warmth in her eyes stronger than any fire. "You taught me something too," she replied. "Strength isn't about never needing anyone. It's about choosing someone anyway." He reached into his coat and withdrew a simple ring of dark metal set with a deep crimson stone that glowed faintly under the moon. It was not extravagant, not designed for spectacle. It was ancient and steady, like him. "I cannot promise sunlight walks or aging beside you," he said honestly, "but I can promise loyalty, protection, and every night of my existence." Emotion softened his voice in a way centuries of power never had. "Will you stand with me, not beneath me, not behind me, but beside me, for however long fate allows?" Aisha's answer did not require hesitation. "Yes," she said, breath forming delicate clouds in the winter air. "Not because you are a king, because you are kind." He slid the ring onto her finger, and for a moment, the vampire and the human were not symbols of power or vulnerability. They were simply two souls who had survived falling from the sky and discovered that respect builds stronger bonds than fear ever could. In the quiet that followed, Cale rested his forehead gently against hers, and the world felt balanced, not between darkness and light, but between trust and choice. Sometimes the coldest hearts are not cruel. They are simply waiting for someone brave enough to see the warmth hidden beneath the frost.